Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Alfy from Onfido. We have a great event for you today. We're going to talk about the role of identity in accelerating the digital transformation in financial services. We have a panel of great speakers, Andras, Chair, Vice President and Principal of Analyst serving at Forrester. Caley is a Vice President with ForgeRock, and myself, an advisor to Onfido on financial services growth. I'm going to let my guest speakers talk to you and introduce themselves. However, I wanted to talk a bit about logistics before we start. We're going to go through about maybe 45 minutes of presentation, the three of us. Feel free to ask questions. You have question comment here on the right. So write your questions, and we're going to leave time at the end of the presentation to answer as many questions as we can. We're also open to further conversations after the event, and certainly sincerely open to discussions and debates and how we can engage and help you take advantage of the offering. So I'll pass the presentation to Andras, and thanks again. Look forward to this event. Andras.
Thanks, Alfy. Appreciate you guys having me. It's an exciting topic, exciting times to talk about identity. So real quick, I'll dig in and we'll just highlight some of the issues, some of the trends that we see in the market here around identity verification and customer-facing identity and access management. So digital approach is really everywhere. This is the new trend. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a lot of questions, a lot of concerns around how you can serve customers online, acquire and retain customers. But after the COVID pandemic, when everybody wants to kind of go really online, it's true even more than before that you want to have a seamless customer experience online. So having said seamless, right, it's always a delicate balance and a hard problem to solve, right? You have security, you want to keep the bad guys out. You have operational efficiency. You cannot hire armies of customer support representatives or help desk personnel internally and externally. And at the same time, you want to make sure that you have a good high level of customer satisfaction out there. So this is something may not have 7 years ago today with customer-facing IAM and more focusing, as I said, on online customer service, customer satisfaction. Seamless approach is very important. If you look at employee and customer-facing IAM, I don't want to go through this entire chart, but suffice it to say that the key business driver for customer IAM is attracting and retaining the customers, right? Versus on employee or workforce or business partner-facing IAM, it's more like the reducing the risk and operational efficiencies for the workforce. The scales are much bigger in customer IAM, usually even very small kind of employee count organizations can have millions or hundreds of millions of users out there. And the identities are important, right? The consumers are unknown at the initial contact and become identified over time. Sometimes you have to verify their identities explicitly, sometimes you don't, but you definitely want to make sure that Mickey Mouse cannot just create an account on your website, right? The privacy protections are very important, user-centric on the customer side, IAM side of things, more like employer-centric on the workforce-facing side of things. The service levels are pretty high everywhere, and the user involvement is also huge. So customers in customer IAM, they want to set their profile. They want to be able to set intelligent notification processes. They want to be able to recover their forgotten credentials, two-factor authentications, passwordless authenticator tokens. So clearly an important aspect of this as well. So, these are definitely differences that we see here. If we look at, identity verification, this is the alpha and omega, right? This is the initial step why, you can issue basically a password or a username password or any kind of combination of an authenticator or login credential to anybody. and you can log people in and you can have them reset their password, but who you actually provide access to, how do you make sure that this person who's coming in for service and speed is the right person, the right guy to serve, and they really exist and not just a synthetic identity or some stolen identity? This is a huge, huge question. So again, increased remote access to services through online and mobile commerce, cost of doing business needs to decrease, much more fewer humans in the process are involved on the customer service side of things. Consumers, my kids will never even want to go to a branch, call a call center, send a piece of snail mail, a paper-based mail. The only way they want to interact through is a mobile application or online in the web browser, right? Data breaches have compromised usernames, passwords, and credit card numbers, so these are really hard to rely on. And there's usually a rising identity theft. We see, during these times of the COVID pandemic, identity theft and synthetic ID use rising, seasonally adjusted about 10%, so 10% increase in here compared to the previous period this year. Again, this applies to registration and online enrollment and authentication type of things here as well. Basically, we see that there's a huge overhaul needed here. So using, the old school credit file header-based authentication questions and knowledge-based authentication, such as, what's your, monthly mortgage payment, or what was the car color that you leased from, 2002 to 2005 kind of questions. These are very difficult to answer, so increased customer friction. They're expensive, right? They can cost 50 cents to $1.25 per question to ask, get from a provider. And the other thing is that if you tune the answerability to low, to high, so that it's easy to answer these questions, then you're going to see a repetition of these numbers. So what's available? Instead of these things, we see phone number-based, identity verification. Is this phone number a prepaid, postpaid number? Is this tied to the same user? Is the subscriber name on this phone number, mobile phone number, or landline subscription match our customer? Social identities, whatever is on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. Is this user likely to be a real user, or this profile just been created to defraud somebody? Behavioral analytics, it's basically all about how you move the mouse, type on the screen, hold the device. The whole idea here is that fraudsters will use different ways of completing forms than legitimate users. So fraudster will likely stop at questions like, what's your name, and what's your gender or date of birth. A real person will never hesitate to answer any of these things. So the dynamics, how these questionnaires and online forms are filled out, will be significantly different between humans and machines and fraudsters and legitimate users as well. There's more and more consortium data, whitelist, blacklist transactions, interrelationships between identities, device IDs that are being used for this. And again, we also see physical documents being used for identity verification. So basically a digital application, a mobile phone-based application, you take a picture of your government-issued ID card, you take a selfie, and then the solution would go out and do an OCR, optical character recognition of the data and letters on the driver's license or passport or ID card, make sure that that combination actually can exist, it's not a stolen identity, and then they will do a comparison of whatever pictures on the government issued photo ID and whatever picture has been taken throughout the live session, do a comparison, do liveness checks, etc. So again, this is a very promising area. Why is this needed? It's needed because you want to operate a customer-obsessed operating model. So most organizations that talk to us do this because they are customer-led, they're insights-driven, they want to respond to change fast, and they want to build a connected ecosystem of identity and access management solutions. This all applies to the structure of the organization, the culture, the talent retention, metrics, what you measure, processes internally, and as well as technology aspects of how you build out all this. So how do we apply this to SIAM? Customer-led, it's important to kind of get customer sat surveys on SIAM, so enrollment, registration, authentication. Do customers like what you do? We do customer focus groups, so this is our in-person kind of conversations. Watch what people do, how they operate the screen. Consult the internal parties, so line of business, digital experience, product people, marketing is very important, customer success, and call center stakeholders constantly. Sometimes compliance also gets here. Sending your call center and line of business as well as security folks to observe as customers do in the field, that's very important. You're going to see some really interesting insights there. Always prioritizing capability security. So it's the carrot, right? The carrot and stick. You have to provide extra service. For example, allow customers to use biometrics, voice, finger, face biometrics instead of typing passwords. That improves the customer experience because you don't have to kind of muck around on small keyboards, but also presents a much greater experience for the customer. You cannot do anything with a single point of observation. This is a verbatim we heard from an interviewee here. You have to measure and measure and measure, right? So these are kind of anecdotal evidence won't really cut it. You have to do a measurement-based change plan. I'm going to talk about what exactly we see people measuring. Anytime there's changes and anomalies, you have to have alarms across multiple points in your identity system and paying attention to any kind of seasonal or cyclic use patterns, right? Some good old A/B alternative testing and registration won't hurt. So again, this is an area we see a lot of development. Organizations say that, hey, by making this one change in the enrollment process, maybe we make a small textual change in the process, maybe we add a new feature, or we add a new capability. We expect to see enrollment drop-offs and abandonments decrease by 5%. That's your business goal. You make a change the registration tax, change the flow, and then you look at how abandonments change. If the abandonment change it basically meets or exceeds your initial your goals, then you will actually put this into production and you roll out the alternative that you tested. Again, user migration is always an important thing. Moving users, in immersion acquired kind of setup from multiple siloed different user stores into one is definitely an important thing. Insights driven, so basically instrumenting your customer identity and access management or SIAM systems through the registration, login, risk-based authentication or RBA, multi-factor authentication, MFA, and self-service capabilities is very important. And looking at all the flow and setting alarms. And sometimes if you have security analytics with the same system, you can kind of do an incremental analysis there as well. Understanding any kind of customer splits between various types of registration, social and classic is important as well. Classic means that this is a registered user through full process. Social registration means that at least the initial part of the registration happened on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. What to measure, right? So basically enrollment abandonments, we see them at 40 to 50% is okay. Anything less than 20% is really good. Asking for minimal information is important. The less data the customer has to type in, the higher likelihood it will be that they will register. If you do need to do some extra steps for identity verification, so this is where where solutions for physical document-based identity verifications come in. These improve the customer experience as well. It's a one-step little thing. You take a picture of your driver's license, you take a picture of yourself, selfie, the tool does the rest of it. Login failure rates, 20 to 30% max is okay, 10 less than 10% is good. This is where any kind of wallets, digital wallets or decentralized digital identities with claims and proofs can come in. And this is where passwordless authentication can come in. Anything that beyond the passwords that does not use the passwords will have significant reduction impacts on these login failure rates. Registration types, these are just kind of some guidance numbers. We see 30% social, 70% classic. So you really do have to pay attention to the classic registration flow. And within these 70% classic, 60% of those are lighter, meaning it may just be an email, and 40% is a full registration. Always measure the rate of change per hour. So any kind of speeds or acceleration or velocity is really important here. Really understanding that is kind of helping you to predict what's going to happen if there's a saturation or performance bottleneck that's supposed to happen at some point in the future. You can see that by monitoring the rate of change in any of these registration failures, login failures, etc. Measuring every component, especially if the environment is complex, is important. So this involves the identity verification process, the authentication pages, any kind of integration with client relationship management APIs such as Salesforce or others, or master data management can also be a bottleneck. Know your top enrollment and login rates and size appropriately. So you have to know how many people are approaching and wanting to register and enroll periodically. And analytics will definitely be of help here. Fast, right? So this is, it's all good, but you have to respond to change quickly. How do you do this? Basically implementing a single user store for all apps, portals, properties, assets, and brands, or consolidating existing properties into one is better. That's just one place to manage users versus having to kind of correlate across multiple repositories. Implementing single sign-on or SSO between apps and portals and properties, brands, assets is also important. The user logs in once, and once they are logged in, they will not be challenged to re-authenticate across other properties across your portfolio. Using orchestration, so not hard coding anything into the applications, that's important. And be ready to change SIAM tool policies based on what the A/B testing operational data suggests, right? So again, it's a measurement-based science. Minimizing payload sizes for slow internet connections and use APIs everywhere for adaptability is important. Everything that is hard-coded, it's just not going to fly. Connected, right? So connected SIAM is connected to a lot of different feeds, identity verification platforms from the bottom, social login, legacy single sign-on or SIAM or identity federation system, consent management, master data management, client relationship management like CRM, marketing campaign management tools, web analytics, and anything beyond just analytics in terms of same like Splunk, ArcSight, etc. So again, this is a large ecosystem of tools here that all need to work in conjunction with each other. Structure. So who owns this thing? We see usually customer IAM and identity verification being a kind of area where there are turf wars, because marketing and line of business want to make sure that the customer friction is as little as possible. At the same time, IT security's task and mandate is to keep the bad guys out. So there's always a little bit of conflict here. You have to work together here. We almost always see, marketing having the budget dollars, but IT security or IT operations being the implementers of a project. Technology-wise, it's important to use open standards, SAML, OIDC, FIDO to SCIM and other protocols for identity verifications. There are, if you see, SIAM orchestrations, SDKs, or APIs calling registration, enrollment, identity verification services, authorization services, best. Externalizing authentication for applications. So app developers should not be concerned about enrolling, registering, and authenticating users. These services around identity and access management should always be externalized and consumed by app developers. And it takes a little bit of a courage initially to implement this. Using mobile biometrics, most mobile devices would have some kind of face biometric, touch ID, touch fingerprint biometrics, as well as voice. There's a microphone. We're also seeing voice being used not only in call centers but also on mobile devices built into a mobile application. Be ready for bot attacks on day one. So this is going to happen. You have to use tools for this, and behavioral biometrics always helps to distinguish between robotic activity and human activity, as well as victims' behaviors. Using the legitimate users' behaviors versus the hackers' behaviors who has stolen the legitimate users' login credentials. It impacts the customer journey, right? It's safe to say that the whole thing has a huge impact on the customer journey. You got to pay attention to this. So basically, if users cannot register, log in, log out, change their password, etc., that is a bad thing. Ultimately, they will go someplace else, and much quicker than people think they are. Especially true during these times of the COVID pandemic. Some difficult identity verification. What we see again, this is the most important area, or one of the most important areas. Staying ahead of fraudsters, and there's always constantly evolving models. Understanding the fraud trends, things like synthetic identity creation, various ways of working around those synthetic identities, how these are cultivated, created, document falsification and forgery methods, buying in the down, in underground internet channels, some of the data complete credit files can be bought for $25, $30 these days. Question generation using non-public data sources. So again, there's a huge debate whether identity verification should use a combination or just one of self-asserted data about users. So that's social media and stuff that the user generates versus using non-self-asserted data. So this is basically court records, publicly available information, credit file headers, information that is not generated and created by the user themselves. Our approach and view is that it's a combination, so it's a multi-layered approach here. So you got to actually use both self-asserted and non-self-asserted data. There's always a measurement of question answerability that you want to have, predictive model scoring. So again, pay attention to this. Identity resolution is a huge question. If you have a marketing tool like an Axiom or others for identity resolution, it's usually a good idea to bring that into the initial identity verification. Reducing false positive and false negative reductions and keeping costs down is definitely important. Fraud detection, velocity checks, pattern recognition, identity characteristic checks, device checks, known fraud checks. These are all important. Link analysis, so kind of creating a link graph of your known fraudulent activity and understanding, hey, maybe this device or this mobile device or this IP address or this phone number has been common to all these 50 different fraudulent attempts to open a new account, right? So that these are all things that you want to do to some degree automated as well as in manual fashion. If you have auto resolution in the tool that you have multiple false positives, then you can close them at the same time if they're coming from the same root cause. Using context-sensitive analysis, influence risk-based authentication decisions in real time. So these are things along the lines of understanding data sources, threat feeds, compromised passwords, compromised IP addresses, compromised devices. They all help, being fed into your identity verification platform. Proliferation and sophistication of identity documents. We see a lot of questions around this. It is really difficult actually to keep up and keep on top of all the valid and government issued photo ID document templates that are out there. There's thousands of those, so it's really something that is really difficult for any end user, if not impossible to do. And then linking online and real-world identities. This is the thing where you want to link, data around publicly available information such as lien records, address lists, credit file headers, to things like cookies, variables, basically browser versions, etc. Some use cases for identity verification. So verifying a human before binding a secure and reusable credential to them. That is the most important use case. Fraud prevention, like true name and synthetic identity theft. Access policy enforcement or authentication to apps and data. So sometimes we use people using, especially in branches, in-person transactions, people showing their driver's licenses. That's in general an identity verification. Or if you have a step-up authentication event, you might have to do some knowledge-based authentication checks in a call center. So, these types of identity verification methods are not exclusively used for initial onboarding and account opening, but they're also used for account maintenance and authentication. And enterprise fraud detection is also part of this. Lastly, there's a lot of channels here. So all these identity verification methods have to work in websites, so browser-based environments, mobile applications, call centers, and in-store and branch processes, we're seeing a lot of cross-pollination of these channels. So a lot of times, you call the call center, they'll send you a one-time password to your mobile phone that you have to repeat, and kind of crossing between these channels helps with the strengthening the enrollment and authentication processes. So recommendations, it's all about the bottom line. Anything that there's a boo-boo, people will go someplace else, will result in less traffic on your site and lost revenues. Omnichannel, so you have to have consistency across these channels. Payment security and fraud management tie. So if you have payment security in your organization, think about that as well. Look at enrollment requirements, knowledge-based authentication, what is the depth of verification, and then look at terms and conditions notifications as well. So with that, I'd like to conclude my part of today's webinar and hand it over to Nick.
Excellent. Thanks, Andras. And you've shared some really valuable guidance there. So what I'd like to do is take the next 10 minutes and a handful of slides to illustrate the ForgeRock capabilities that are helping our customers in financial services really address the demand of digital transformation, which, let's face it, over the last few months has become an absolute imperative for organizations to improve the way that they engage with customers digitally, particularly with the in-person access to branches really being limited. At the same time as digital transformation for the customer, it's also about for the organization as well. It's how does the organization use a platform providing identity and access management that helps them be more agile, more responsive to the kind of demands that the business is going to continually want to improve. Because transformation is nothing new to financial services. Essentially, ever since there was the first exchange of money, of value, you've wanted to know who's on the receiving end, who's going to be liable for that. So that ability to understand the identity of the individual that's engaging services is really at the heart of trust, and that trust goes both ways. Trust from the individual customer actually using your services digitally online. What they're going to be looking for is ease of use. They're going to be able to really kind of access what they want without duplication, without wasting time. And that's really where you see these 4 pillars across the top there: frictionless registration and access. So providing the kind of capabilities that will really speed up their ability to assess you for the first time, perhaps in terms of the offer that you're providing. Without necessarily going through a full registration, you can provide that kind of access, very much taking minimal amounts of data, really respecting that personal privacy, that the PII and the sensitivities of how you need to process that. Always best to ask for the most minimal amount of information in order to unlock the next step of the journey. Personalization, I think, is the watchword. We're in the experience economy, and being personal, particularly if you've had a relationship with a customer for 10 years, is absolutely critical. I think everybody recognizes that when you turn up online and you're not recognized for who you are and the relationship that you've had with a bank or an insurer for a very long period of time, it can be very frustrating to then have to start providing credentials, or if you're passed along that customer journey to several individuals that might be helping you with a particular question that you have, or an ask that you want to make of the organization. Repeating yourself and duplicating, repeating the credentials, repeating your security is going to be a challenge for the customer experience. And look, there's many options. Financial services is challenged with being disrupted by compliance, open banking, fintech. There's a lot of challenges that mean being more personal with customers is definitely a priority. And channels, there are many of them: web, mobile, call center, branch, and everything in between. And it's about how do you move seamlessly between all of those so that you can literally pick up where you left off, whether you've started the transaction online, you've moved to the branch, or you've moved to the call center and then they've told you to go in branch. It should not be something which you then need to duplicate that effort. It can be picked up from where you left off at any one of those channels. As Andras shared, the focus on fraud is only right in this day and age in terms of the way that we've seen fraud, ticking up. And so it's really important that security is that consideration in terms of the way that you address identity and access management, who's accessing services, under what conditions. And you see there some questions there at the bottom. who, what, why, when, and where. At ForgeRock, we've been answering contextual access as a demand with our customers for a very long time. That's what we've understood in the security world, is understanding the context within which someone is wanting to gain access. Who are they? What device are they on? How has that device changed over time? Why are they accessing? What's the service that they're looking to use? And does that map to the kind of behaviors of that individual and that device? When? What time of day is it? Is it outside of normal behavior? And critically, where? Location awareness is really the next step, and that respecting personal data, the ability you have as an organization, as a financial services provider, to recognize the sensitivity of the information that your customers are providing to you, is all about really crossing the bridge to where they feel comfortable in sharing not only just that sensitive credential data and their financial information, but also where are they right now? What are they doing right now? Where are they in the world? And that location awareness really can drive a great deal more personalization. And we're seeing it not just within financial services, but across multiple sectors. The ability to almost become a digital concierge, recognizing what situation a particular customer might be in and how you can best help them, either with information, guidance, advice, or support, is really critical. So I'm not going to spend too long on here, and we could, right? I know everyone is challenged with legacy, and but I wanted to call out just a few examples of where I think some of the challenges that just the way that infrastructure has grown up over time continue to slow down and hamper the efforts to be more agile. And particularly when you think about what's happened since the beginning of this year with the pandemic, the ability to be responsive and agile means you've got to have something that is more flexible, that is more robust, more scalable, to address the kind of peaks and also the changing demands in terms of how you interact with customers. One of the key aspects, either through acquisition or growth, is really siloed identities. You know, the ForgeRock platform is a great way to abstract identity from those individual applications and systems, so that you can better recognize in a single customer view who it is that's actually interacting with you. Outdated security, I'm going to share some thoughts with regards to how we're working with Onfido, particularly at that real kind of account opening element. But it's also about login. You know, passwords have gone past their sell-by date. And in reality, you know, ensuring that there's choice is also really critical in this, not just being a millennial digital transformation, but being the whole of your demographic, bringing everybody into a digital experience where they can really choose the way that they want to authenticate. They have options. So particularly driving self-service, I think it also impacts the bottom line, enables the organization to only have to address the kind of customer issues that are really demanding. And if they can be self-serve, particularly forgotten password, which Andras shared a view on in terms of what you should expect in terms of abandonment, the forgotten password is definitely a drain, both on time, resource, and cost. Extensibility, SDKs, APIs, you know, the rise of the financial ecosystem with third-party players, both those that are sanctioned by compliance like open banking, PSD2, but then equally your own partners and how you might want to share identity information. You know, the ability to have an extensible platform that can meet the changing nature of your use cases is really critical. And that's particularly true around the use of APIs more broadly, and then equally how that combines with SDKs and cloud services to really help you accelerate that transformation. ForgeRock's known for scale, you know, in terms of running tokens that enable sessions to be managed. We have one customer that's managing 300 million session tokens at any one time. So as your demands on identity on an identity platform grow, with the complexity of not just the credential of the individual customer, but the relationship. So the family relationship, are there children that are being invited into your favorite bank in order that they can learn about money? So the ability to be able to use relationships is really key. And then when you think about your demands internally around enabling chatbots, looking at microservices, looking at services themselves and attaching an identity, binding an identity to them, means that the complexity of your identity and access management requirements is going to grow over time. Really key that you're able to grow and scale. And we see that within peak incidents like Black Friday events, where you're going to want to be able to do, tens of thousands of authentications per second, and have an infrastructure that can cope with that. I think there's a lot of technical debt in the identity and access management world that needs to be addressed, because it's holding back the speed of transformation. And it's also a challenge in terms of troubleshooting, and also where your talent is best applied internally within your teams. So having someone with real expertise in the identity and access management world, tasked with manual, semi-manual, in terms of feeding and watering some of the technologies that perhaps should be relinquished, is really key that you address that with a more strategic approach. And financial services is nothing new with compliance, right? But I think the way that we see it at ForgeRock is really compliance is the low watermark. It has to be done. It's a forcing function. Security, a higher watermark than that. Obviously, the ability to deliver both of those in tandem is really critical. And I think experience is a step up. And so choosing a provider that you're able to address all of those three elements with the same solution is something which we've been working with our customers on for a good while. It's all about engagement. When you think about trust, it's about loyalty. It's about how long the customer is going to be with you. There's so many options available coming into financial services, with the slicing and dicing of financial services into the world of fintech. And identity really does play across so many different aspects of the business, the customer journey. We're going to focus in on that financial services customer journey around the sign up. And the consideration is probably the first step, where they are actually logging in, they're coming onto your website. And it's about how do you engage and how do you serve the marketing team with an ability to have that bite-sized interaction that just makes it simple, straightforward, no long length terms and conditions. And it just enables them to feel more comfortable in terms of sharing the kind of information that's going to be in the sign up, and really speeding that sign up in a digital manner with the capabilities that Onfido provide is really critical. What ForgeRock's really been focused on is orchestration. So the ability to work with a partner like Onfido means you can orchestrate that customer journey, simplify the buyer process, ensure that you're managing those abandonment rates by using analytics across every step of the journey, and then serving it really with that life cycle management approach of a single customer view for the business and for the customer to really enable them to self-serve. I think importantly, I don't want to forget that it's not just about the identity and access management team or the security team. It's about how does the right platform deliver results and outcomes and capability to numerous teams across the business that are going to be involved in the engagement with customers and really managing that experience. Marketing has become key in terms of targeted marketing, managing consent, really delivering that personal experience, and how does it serve the development team in enabling them to not have to be bothered with authentication because it's been abstracted and is managed by another team. Equally, we know that the environment that you're all working in is hybrid. In a sense, what it means is that you've got to have a hybrid architecture and an approach to addressing the challenges of that, whether it's out in the cloud, whether it's on premise, with a capability that spans that architecture. And then clearly, we never lose sight of security. It's important that we are able to enable you with the methodologies that are relevant, whether it's Carter, Zero Trust, the methodologies that you're using in order to be able to improve your security day over day, time over time. And we increasingly see, and we're implementing the power of machine learning to answer some very long-standing issues around access governance, for example, on the inside, but more importantly on the outside, the ability to be more predictive in the way that your service needs to step up, particularly if you're using cloud services, being able to predict the peaks and troughs of demand and initiate the right amount of capability from the headroom that a platform like ForgeRock will give you is really key. And my final slide is really just about, you know, an insight into, you know, this is a visual design tool that there's really been a differentiator for ForgeRock, just in terms of the capabilities that it delivers. It's essentially drag and drop, as you can see there. On the left-hand bar, you've got the ability to drag and drop not only just capabilities from ForgeRock, but we also invite our technical partners, such as Onfido. We have about 70 of them in our ecosystem, to provide qualified integrations, so these become a node in that design palette. So you can literally just drag and drop it. You can instrument the customer journey. You can also put metrics and timers into this journey. So each step of the way, when you're doing A/B testing and you're splitting out 1,000 users, 10,000 users, you're really able to measure exactly what the response is from perhaps a fraud prevention risk score that's coming in to enable that next step of the journey. I'll leave you with just some digital transformation elements that ForgeRock has brought to our customers over the last little while. I said passwords have lost, gone past their sell-by date. Usernames too. There is the capability now, and this is actually, our platform is built on open standards, the ability to go beyond username and passwords, and to really provide something that is truly frictionless and using a web authentication standard. So this is an innovation that is available right now, and it again, you're picking up enough, if I build out the rest of this slide, device context, you're picking up enough device context to really have a confirmation at that point before someone actually carries out something as a transaction, at which point you obviously want to have an adaptive capability to be able to step up at the appropriate time, respecting the choice that your customer might have made to use a particular biometric or a one-time passcode, whatever their choice has been. So that kind of flexibility is really key, but it's about the balance between experience and security, and we're definitely getting that right in terms of the customers and the outcomes that they're achieving with our platform. Our focus really over the last little while in terms of our development has really been around registration, something we call progressive profiling, and also self-service. The ability to, if you've forgotten a password, to be able to retrieve that very easily yourself. The registration piece is really interesting. So as well as being able to use social IDs, it's really been critical for us in terms of our partnership with Onfido to really establish at the point of account opening the verification of the human identity behind that digital transaction. And so the capabilities that Onfido have brought to our offer in terms of a combined proposition is really valuable. And what we're then doing is orchestrating, securing the credential that's been provided, passport, driving license, whatever's been required, really securing that credential in a robust directory that assures you with the right level of security. But equally then ensuring that the path of that journey can be as frictionless as possible until it hits a policy which says, actually, we're going to need to really verify exactly who you are at this point. So I just wanted to share a few ideas in terms of some of the capabilities that we can bring, and obviously happy to follow this up with more detailed conversations, but that concludes what I wanted to share. And I wanted to hand over to my colleague Alfy, and he can take on that piece around the registration, which I think is so key.
Thank you, Nick. Gentlemen, great insights. Thank you for sharing. Probably I don't have much to add after Andras has pretty much articulated everything I wanted to say, but I genuinely wanted to say a few things to kind of tie it all together. We believe in Onfido that it's about the real identity, right? So the digital identity is great. Fundamentally is the heart of the customer centricity model. But we ought to think about how do you make it real? And it's not just IDV or proofing, it's actually making it real. So marrying the identity, the physical identity that you and I carry, and bring it to the digital world, and it becomes the identity of record. And you could use this in different ways. And I could take you on an imagined journey. I come from the banking world, and I've been talking to few banks in the past few weeks, few months, about how do you take the real identity and bring it to life. It's not just about account opening, which is the beginning of the journey. I genuinely believe that marrying exercise with the fraud detection capabilities, with the elimination of mistakes and errors, and providing certain accuracies and improving the speed and velocity of the possibilities are almost endless. And my argument has been, and the customers that I've been talking to, accepting the argument that says the cost of proofing the identities or converting digital identities into real identities are immense. And we have data that to suggest, it will reduce time to acquisition by about 80%. It will reduce fraud by about 40%. It will reduce the cost to serve by about 12%. So there is a lot of data out there that proves, it is the right approach to marry physical identities to digital identities. And Andras kind of addressed this. It's a composite identity. It's not just a piece of ID that proves I am who I am, or a passport or driver's license. It's also, there's a lot of data out there that if you can combine those in a platform like ForgeRock, and you can serve your customer digitally, I think you can achieve amazing results. And I wanted to kind of take you on an imagined journey in the few minutes that I have left. Imagine the banking world where you can acquire your customer in seconds, not through a branch visit. Granted, the traffic on the branch is being challenged as we speak, and analysts are suggesting that the branch is not going to remain the same. And actually, there's an IBM study that published, I want to say 4 or 5 days ago, that suggests 80% of the consumers are concerned about in the in-person interaction. I was talking to an executive in Mega Bank yesterday or day before yesterday, suggesting that they gotta reduce the branch footprint, not necessarily the number of branches, but what the branch does. So in other words, the notion of need for digitizing the exercise of customer acquisition at the point of interaction is a reality today. Think about the decisioning that you and I go through if I apply for a loan. The exercise of, hey, could you prove you are still alive? Or can you prove that you are who you are? Again, if you have one system of record that takes your real identity in a digital world, the decisioning exercise becomes a different conversation altogether, especially when you tie the composite identities, if you wish, along the way, your credit score, your history, your court record, and your alimonies, and on and on and on. So if you can really consolidate data in a system of identity of system of record for identity, you could argue that decisioning exercise becomes a completely different thing. Think about the payment in the new world, when I really send money to a real person and receive money from a real person. Think about the documentation and the procedures and the consent and the forms that I need to fill. And again, I need to walk to an office or a branch or a record or system of record to kind of show I am who I am, to get the mortgage and the loan documents processed. Think about the support line. Think about, I'm calling the support line for a bank, and I have to go through, recite all my information, and I forgot my password, and I have to give them my date of birth and my height and the color of my hair and yada, yada, yada to prove that I am who I am in the new digital world. And arguably that's the new world. It's going to be a different experience. So I also want to take you to the notion of the loan origination. I have a loan origination or mortgage servicing background. The origination exercise in the US is at least 92 hours work. For some of you who live in that world, 92 hours worth of work. And if you can reduce that by 42 hours around identity and customer interactions and shaking hand and ID extraction and taking the data out of it, it's amazing savings. Think about signing the consent. If you buy a mortgage today in the US, you sign about 62 pages of consent. Yeah, please go check my credit report. Please ensure that the gas bill has been paid in the previous house and the new house. So on and on and on and on. Think about the disclosures that are coming along for me to prove I am who I am. I'm signing for these disclosures. I read everything. I understood everything. So the amount of efficiencies that you can get out of these use cases are unbelievably huge. Think about the operating efficiencies. Working with a bank in the East Coast, suggesting that fraud detection alone has been improved by something like 97%. And I have use cases, and I can share some data that to show a human eye could not detect the accuracy of a driver's license. And actually, we have data to prove it, and we have pictures to prove it. So folks could defraud a bank by faking an ID, and if a human being is reviewing those documents, they're just going to pass. So we're finding machine learning and artificial intelligence to be a very sophisticated way to kind of say, hold on, this is a spoof. This is not the real person. This is an image that been inserted. That alone is hugely expensive, just spotting the fraud. Think about the velocity and the speed. Think about the accuracy that you get out of it. If you extract the data and dump it into the system of record or system of intelligence or system of interaction, you could argue that the benefits are immense. The final thing, as Nick just said, the onboarding exercise, just extracting the KYC data, ensuring that I have the right data on Alfy and Joe and Nick and Andras and others. I have the data, A, verified, 2, extracted, 3, shipped to or orchestrated to the next workflow, so I can report it, I can examine it, I can store it, I can do whatever I need to do with it. Fundamentally, that's a night and day type of exercise. So this is kind of how we do this, and I'm going to leave you with that. We basically take a picture of the ID, whether it's a passport or driver's license or whatever. 145 countries, we have the capacity to examine those certificates or documents. And on the other side, the second part of the exercise is I take a selfie, which is, amazing experience, right? I can take a selfie, and it's not just a stagnant selfie, it's a video selfie where I can take the whole image of my face, and the analytics would run in the back and ensure that, yeah, I got the face intrinsics, and I can match it to the picture, and the picture is real, the video is real, and fundamentally I can marry them together and create this whole digital identity, and I can pass it along. This is really the technology that Onfido does. We certainly value the technology that ForgeRock that I spent few years of my career with ForgeRock as well. So I have appreciation for the system and the tool and the capacity to handle millions of users instantly, if you wish. And if I can feed that system with real identities, then you got an amazing technology that could elevate the value of identity, truly transform your banking operating model into being customer-centric versus a product-centric. So I'm going to leave you with this notion, and certainly happy to take your questions. We have 7-8 minutes to take questions left. I'm happy to continue the conversation, reach out, happy to interact, and I'm sure my colleagues here as well would be happy to answer questions, to continue the conversation. Again, Andras and Nick, great to see you guys. Amazing insight, articulate document is amazing. Andras and Nick is, as usual, eloquent. Thank you again.
Thank you, Alfy. Thanks. Appreciate it. Just in terms of questions, I think we've had a couple come in. I think there's one here that is probably for all three of us, but if we start with you, Andras, in your experience, I think you've got a very wide view of the market and implementations and different vendors. How long should a financial services provider expect an implementation to take?
Sure. So we've seen implementation projects depending obviously on the difficulty of the data integration from existing transactional systems like core banking systems and various other sources. If things go well, right, and it's a medium-sized kind of project on average, right, usually we're seeing 2 to 3 months of an implementation time not being unrealistic. Sometimes it's a lot shorter, right? Because it's just you don't have data integration challenges. Sometimes it's longer because downside, down a rev or legacy or obsolete transactional or customer management systems. But 2 to 3 months is usually a good initial estimate.
Yeah, and I'll go next, and then maybe I'll come to you, Alfy, for a wrap up on Onfido's experience. But I think at ForgeRock, we've got demonstrations that we've been providing for some time about standing up an infrastructure, cloud native using Kubernetes, Docker, provided Helm charts, the ability to stand up an infrastructure within minutes that can support millions of identities. But that's not the real world. The real world is exactly what Andras was talking about, which is the complex integration that's required, a recognition of the investments that have already been made into some critical technologies which are definitely in the path of the customer journey. So it is very dependent, but typically we've been working in some really challenging environments. Some of the banking licenses that have been handed out in environments like Singapore and Hong Kong, virtual banking, as it's called, has really been cloud native, mobile first capabilities. And we've been able to stand up our infrastructure to enable the CI/CD pipeline to flow within a matter of days with some of our key partners. So, but I think in terms of other more sort of established customers that are really kind of have a large amount of legacy infrastructure that are probably sitting between on-premise and cloud, that can take months of a program of work with our partners as well.
Yeah.
Alfy?
My answer is it depends. If the identity systems are in place and there is procedures and processes and infrastructure to support elevating identity beyond systems and organizations, it's days. I could argue hours, and we're engaging in a consultative approach. We come in and workshop the exercise, if you wish, of deployment together. It's days. But if the identity infrastructure is scattered and it's legacy, it would add few months to the original identity exercise. So we're an SDK driven, API driven. So if you have the infrastructure, we can also argue that we could deploy in hours, but that's not the real world.
Very good. And we've just got a couple of minutes. So, and this is a question that probably demands quite a bit longer than a few minutes, but let's just see whether just some final thoughts, which I think are absolutely relevant to the focus of our discussion today. So what are some of the biggest challenges with physical document verification online? And I'll come to you first, Andras. What do you see?
Sure. So in terms of, I think it's two things, right? One is always the usability of the physical document. If you're trying to do this online on a mobile device, right? So scan the ID, take a picture. There's always the human element, right? People are not necessarily using the right light sources. They may not hold their IDs at the right angle. So there's all sorts of challenges, right, that relate to the human behavior that is required, or how the human operator, i.e. the end user consumer, should work with the solution and their own photo ID and taking their own picture, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is always exceptions handling, like false accept and false reject, predominantly false rejects handling. How do you minimize? So if the tool says, this is not the right user and the opposite is true, in reality it's the right user, it's just the tool says it cannot register or your authentication is invalid. What are the ways to actually effectively and speedily resolve this type of situation, and without having a huge impact on the customer experience and friction, right? So I think these are probably the two areas that are difficult. Definitely the tools and solutions are improving in the areas of reliability and response and accuracy rates.
Which is exactly where you sit. Thanks, Andras. That's where you sit, Alfy. So just some closing thoughts in the last minute or so that we have just around how Onfido is addressing those challenges.
Sure. So I'm agreeing 100% what Andras eloquently stated. The extra challenge that we're seeing is basically certain languages, character-based languages in East Europe and in Asia have, some difficulty finding the character and mapping the character and validating the character. So in Onfido, we have the human element as well. So we have a small group of folks that could look at the document and verify, yeah, the picture looks like, with high certainty and high precision, looks like the image on the selfie. And we've been able to achieve 98.7% detection rate. So great results. Obviously, it's not 100% yet, and probably will take some time to get to 100%, but we're covering the iniquity with human interaction.
Very good. Excellent. And that, I think, brings us to the close. Thank you both. Really appreciated the time with you, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Appreciate it.